everyone. Thank you for joining us. The Trump administration is defending its immigration tactics despite growing legal scrutiny. President Trump hosted El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele at the White House Monday. The U.S. has paid El Salvador $6 million to house deportees at the country's notorious mega prison. But the way the administration has carried out these deportations is under question. Last week, the Supreme Court said the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father who was sent to the prison by mistake. But when asked about bringing the man back to the U.S., President Bukele told reporters he had no plans to do so.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi joins us now. Olivia, what more do we hear in the Oval Office about this case and the Supreme Court's ruling?
Well, Lindsay, essentially in that Oval Office meeting today, no one took responsibility for who's in charge of returning Mr. Garcia back to the United States after the Supreme Court said that the U.S. and this administration must facilitate a way to return him to the United States. Attorney General Pam Bondi, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Trump, President Bukele, all of them either said it wasn't within their power to return him or that they wouldn't be returning him. So the question now begs, what exactly happened to Mr. Garcia? You heard Bukele there in that Oval Office meeting say that he's not very fond of releasing terrorists into his country. We know that Mr. Garcia is in that notorious El Salvadorian prison, and as a result, he'd have to be removed from that prison, put into the country, and then brought back to the United States. He does not seem willing to do that. This administration is not asking him to do that. So a lot of questions remain about whether or not they're going to take this Supreme Court ruling seriously and whether or not they're going to abide by what the court ruled, which was essentially in a 9-0 filing that they have to comply with their order and return him to the United States. But by all indications, this administration made it very clear today that they do not plan on doing that.
President Trump also said Monday he would be fine with sending American citizens who committed crimes to El Salvador. What do we hear about that? And is that something the administration is seriously planning on doing?
Yeah, this is actually something that was quite interesting today. This happened before reporters were in the Oval Office, but it was actually caught on a stream that was being played by some members who were in Mr. Bukele's entourage that were with him in the Oval Office today. Some of those people that were with him were streaming that interaction where you can hear Trump say to him, we're going to start getting out what he's calling homegrowns. And he said, you're going to need to build more of those prisons, at least 5 more of those giant prisons to start housing them. And essentially what Trump means here and what he's been saying about this is these homegrown terrorists, which he then talked about later, are people he considers to be doing dubious acts, like he says, pushing people onto subway tracks or hitting old women with baseball bats from behind. These are folks that Trump says should be deported to another country, even though they're American citizens committing crimes in the U.S. Trump says they wouldn't serve their sentences here. Instead, they would be deported. Now, legally, that is very shaky, and there's not a lot of history of how to do that and what that would look like. But we know that this administration has been using some previous laws, such as the Illegal Aliens Act 1798, to take out some of these deportations. And it would be interesting to see what exactly the legal grounds are that they're going to use to deport these, quote, homegrown people.
Olivia Rinaldi, thank you. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez joins us now. Camilo, I want to play some of what President Trump's cabinet members said in the Oval Office Monday about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case. Let's listen.
That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs. If they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it.
So we had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States. A district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously.
So they also said that Abrego Garcia is here illegally, had a valid deportation order. 2 courts found him to be a member of MS-13. and that no version ends up with him living here, that he's a citizen of El Salvador, and if he came back, we'd deport him again. Can you fact check some of these claims for us?
Well, what we do know, Lindsay, is that, yes, Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia did indeed initially enter the U.S. illegally and did not have legal documentation to be here. But in 2019, an immigration judge at the Justice Department granted him something called withholding of removal, which is a legal protection from deportation. And the government, after that point, was barred and prohibited from deporting him specifically to El Salvador. Why? Because he was able to demonstrate to a judge that he could be potentially persecuted by gangs there if deported. And the administration deported him in March to that home country of El Salvador, despite that withholding of removal order. If they had any information, Lindsay, that tied Mr. Abrego Garcia to a gang and wanted to change that, they should have reopened this case, gone in front of an immigration judge, and tried to terminate that legal protection from deportation. They failed to do so, and that is why they have, in many occasions, admitted that they made a mistake here.
What happens next?
Well, we have a hearing in the federal district court in Maryland tomorrow, and the judge will decide whether or not the administration is complying with their order to facilitate, quote unquote, the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia to the U.S. The administration seems to be taking the position, Lindsay, that facilitate merely and simply means taking any steps to facilitate his entry into the U.S. if the Salvadoran government agrees to release him and return him to the country. And now, as we have learned today, it looks like President Bukele of El Salvador is not inclined to do so.
Do you expect that that will be a main subject of the hearing tomorrow, or whether, in fact, this facilitation does depend on whether El Salvador is willing to release Abrego Garcia?
Yes, and I think the administration will argue that federal courts have no legal authority or jurisdiction to basically tell the executive branch what to do when it comes to foreign affairs.
Another Columbia student leader who protested on campus against Israel's war on Gaza was detained by ICE officials after being called in for a U.S. Citizen interview. His name is Mohsen Madawi. He's spoken to 60 Minutes in the past.
Yeah.
What has been the university's response, and what more do we know about the case?
This is what we know. Mr. Madawi is a legal permanent resident in the U.S., meaning that he has a green card. He is not in the country illegally. In fact, he was in the process of becoming a naturalized U.S. citizen, and this is why he went to a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office in Vermont to start that process and finalize it to become a U.S. citizen. But during that interview, as it was taking place, we understand that ICE officers and agents arrested him, and we believe now that he is being held under the same rarely used law that is being justified and being used in the Mahmoud Khalil case. And that is, of course, a power that allows the Secretary of State to determine that somebody who is here in the country and who's not a citizen, including legal residents, can be deported if he finds that their presence or activities here pose adverse foreign policy consequences to the U.S.
And that particular rule, we aren't exactly clear judicially what needs to be proven, right? Or can it just simply be the Secretary of State saying,
that is still very much up in the air.
Okay.
But I went to Mahmoud Khalil's immigration court hearing on Friday in Louisiana, and that immigration judge overseeing that case said that all it takes is a 2-page letter by Secretary Marco Rubio.
Okay. Camilo, Montoya-Galvez, thank you. CBS News Justice Department reporter Jake Rosen joins us now. Jake, let's have you weigh in. Remind us what the Supreme Court ruled regarding Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S.
Well, on Thursday last week, Lindsay, the Supreme Court said in a 9-0 decision that the United States must facilitate, and that is the key word at the center of this, the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. But they also ordered the district judge up the road in Maryland to clarify her order. In her order, she said she used the term effectuate his return, and the Supreme Court took issue with that and said that that needed to be clarified. However, the district judge in a hearing on Friday said that there really was no need to really parse out the difference between these two words, that her order was to bring him back, and that she wanted to see daily status updates from the Department of Justice on what they're doing from people, not just the Department of Justice attorney, but from specific people who are involved in this, whether it's an ICE official, Department of Homeland Security, State Department. We just got today's, it was filed an hour late, Lindsay, and the Department of Justice in the filing cited a State Department employee who pointed to President Bukele's comments today that, quoting him, saying, "You can't suggest that I would smuggle a alleged gang member back into the United States. Again, the government is now being more and more brazen with these statements. After saying they had no update over the weekend, now they're basically pointing to the president of El Salvador saying, yes, sure, we'll facilitate, but to facilitate, it takes two to tango. The Salvadoran president says no, basically calling it ball game over, at least it seems like for now, from the Department of Justice.
Does this set up a showdown between the executive and judicial branches?
It's certainly the closest that we've come on these multiple friction points that we've seen. I mean, we saw earlier today the Trump administration not allow Associated Press reporters into the room after a judge ordered that they needed to be allowed back in. We saw the Department of Justice not turn two planes around carrying alleged Tren de Aragua gang members. And before the Department of Justice was forced to show why they shouldn't be held in contempt of court and have there be sanctions or punishment for that, the Supreme Court dismissed the order at the center of that case. And while that proceeding is technically still not finished, basically the entire case is moot and there haven't been more proceedings on it. This is certainly the most brazen that the president and his allies have been, especially when you've basically heard all along before these proceedings even happened, that the White House, from the podium in the briefing room, from President Trump, from Vice President Biden, basically saying they are not bringing him back, no shot, despite now 3 courts have ordered him returned.
A hearing was held Monday to determine the potential release of Tufts University student Rumeysa Ozturk, who was detained by immigration authorities last month after having her student visa revoked. What happened in court Monday?
Well, it was not in immigration court like you just discussed with Camilo. This specific case was in district court in Vermont. Attorneys from Miss Ozturk argued that she should be freed from detention and that a district judge has the authority to do that, saying that there's been no proof at all suggesting that she has any ties to Hamas. In the op-ed that the administration has repeatedly cited, there's no mention of Hamas. She just called for her university, Tufts, to divest from Israel. The judge took these arguments into consideration. The Department of Justice wants this case dismissed so that they can do what they want with her in terms of immigration and deportation proceedings, or they want this case moved to Louisiana, which it is not going to go to because last week we saw a judge say if she was being detained at the time of this court filing to block her deportation in Vermont, that's where these proceedings need to play out. But currently right now she's being held in Louisiana, where a lot of these people are basically getting ready to be deported once the Trump administration even gets the whiff of an okay.
Jake Rosen, thank you.